let's talk about your backstory, Nick, and how it happened to you, how you found yourself addicted and how bad it got.
How do a nice guy like me wind up addicted and doing what I do now? Yeah. Well, you kind of mentioned the fact that all families are touched. They say 1 out of 10 people are predisposed towards having an addictive personality, and 30% of families have been touched by addiction. So it touches each and every one of us. So this is not just something that happens to a certain group. It's the great equalizer. That's one thing that I grew to find out. Yeah, it's, and we're so confused as to how to understand this problem and how to treat it. So often, I think that we look at this problem of addiction, we look at it so often as a supply side problem and not a demand side problem. We talk about fentanyl and coming into the border from Mexico, and that's a problem, having too much of it, awash in our society. But what we're not looking at closely enough is, why do we have the demand? Why are we so thirsty for losing ourselves in addictive substances, whether it's pharmaceuticals or whether it's alcohol or whether it's digital? It's what is our emptiness all about, that we're seeking escape and numbing in all the wrong places? And so we don't look at that part enough, because we could shut down the border and shut down all the fentanyl, but people have been getting and escaping their pain for a very long period of time. So my backstory, how I landed here: I'm the son of Greek immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. I was 3 years old when we came to New York from Greece. My father was 13, 14 years old when the Nazis invaded northern Greece, and witnessed most of the men in his village were murdered and had to hide in the mountains and escape to Greece penniless. So my father had seen a lot of horrible things in his life as a young man growing up when he escaped to Athens. And my mother had survived a devastating earthquake. Now we're speaking about devastation in Hawaii, but she had a natural disaster on her island of Cephalonia. So my parents had lived a pretty hard life when they emigrated to the U.S. in the mid-1960s. So I was the child of Greek immigrants who had struggled. And in that struggle, there was a lot of dysfunction. My parents had a lot of love in their hearts, but you don't go through stuff like that and not have some emotional scars. And so, I grew up in New York City, good kid, middle class, lower middle class background. But I went to the Bronx High School of Science. I was a smart kid. I tested well. I played sports a lot, and I overcame a lot of, maybe let's call it, that childhood dysfunction. But my parents always instilled a sense in me of get an education and have a better life. They came here to have a better life for me. So, and I did, and I've talked and written about this, because when people of my parents' generation, or the greatest generation, people have seen some real hard things in their lives, they have a pretty profound sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And the children of those folks sometimes have a little bit more of a struggle, because, by the time I landed in college and I went to Cornell, upstate New York, I know you're a fan of upstate New York, and I've gone to school there as well. My wife went to Syracuse, I went to Cornell, and I got out of school, and I had the quintessential existential crisis early on. I didn't know, my friends were all going to graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had a profound sense of imposter syndrome, because I was lower middle class, and a lot of my peers were from different backgrounds than I was. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I sort of drifted into a career, and I was working a corporate job right out of school in 1986. And I had the opportunity to work at a nightclub in Midtown Manhattan, the Copacabana, the original Copacabana in New York. Wow. And part of my background is I had been a martial artist. I had a black belt in Japanese karate. That was I did a lot of sports. I played basketball, football, track, but I did this karate, and karate was sort of my gateway into being the doorman at the Copacabana in 1986, when I was frustrated with my corporate day job. And it was sort of an escape. It was a way to sort of live almost a double life, where I could, kind of live this alternate world that was exciting and fun. And eventually I quit the day job and kind of got deeper into the night job. And eventually that led into me opening my own restaurant and nightclubs in 1988 in Lower Manhattan. And this was sort of this was a pretty cool time in New York. New York was very exciting at that point. There was a downtown New York scene with the art worlds were colliding with the music industry. And there was, for a middle-class kid from Astoria, Queens, which is where I was from, this was a very seductive world. And so I was 24 years old. I was in New York Magazine as the New York's youngest nightclub owner. And it was intoxicating, literally and metaphorically. And eventually I fell into very bad habits. And so within a few short years, I wound up pretty horribly addicted. And I had one of these awakenings where I was realizing that I was in this, the New York nightlife world, this is, which still exists today, the page 6 sort of glossy. We had a lot of celebrities would come into, again, I'm 24, 25, 26, and we had Tom Cruise and Uma Thurman and John F. Kennedy Jr. were regulars at my night spot downtown. And for a kid with humble beginnings like I had, it was, as I said, intoxicating, but also confusing. And by the time I was in my early 30s, it was all spiraling out of control. Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York, and he had an anti-nightlife task force. And in pretty short order, I fought the law, and the law won. I had my liquor licenses revoked, because the reality was at that point I was not a very good steward of these businesses, because I was struggling with my own personal addictive demons. And it started with alcohol and cocaine, and eventually it did turn into heroin, which in my entire life I never would have believed that would have happened, because I was raised with parents that had taught me about character and integrity, and yet somehow I lost myself in this world. And what I discovered, and so my addiction got so bad after my nightclubs were shut down in 1995. At that point, I was totally rudderless. I was now left without an identity, without a career. I had some resources still left, but I was broken spiritually, emotionally, physically, and went through a really terrible 2 or 3 year period of trying to go in and out of treatment programs to get better. I'm sure you can relate with your sister, because it's pretty treacherous waters to navigate, going in and out of detoxes and hospitals and trying to figure it out and that's the terrifying part for most addicts when you try to get better. Because initially, a lot of addicts don't want to get better. They want to go back to when they were able to moderate their usage. They want to go back to when it was manageable. And I tried to do that for a period of time until I proved to myself that I couldn't control the addiction anymore. And then when I really tried to stop and I couldn't, that was the terrifying period. And I became convinced at one point that I was just going to die and implode. And I almost did. Eventually, my bottom
then you
was,
did. You kind of did.
As far as the doctors are concerned, I did. I was asystolic without a heartbeat. I had a fatal overdose where my heart stopped for over an hour and 15 minutes. I was at Cornell Presbyterian, and this is before they had Narcan and all sorts of medications that can revive you. And so I wound up being barely resuscitated after an hour and 15 minutes. My parents were at my bedside vigil. I was in a coma. I was on life support, and I wasn't expected to survive the first 24 hours. My organs began to shut down. They thought I wouldn't make it to the morning. And I did. I survived. But then they told my family that I was going to be in a vegetative state because I had too much oxygen loss to my brain. So if I were to survive, I would be a vegetable. And when I came out of it about 2 weeks later, the only permanent physiological damage, I lost most of the hearing in my left ear. So I did have, and I had really bad tinnitus where there was this really loud ringing. But when I came out of that coma, and, I didn't have a classic white light experience, which I was pissed off about because I'd always been interested in white light experiences, and I didn't have one. But I felt profoundly different. Something had shifted within me, and I felt I wasn't put on this earth just to lose myself in this addictive gerbil wheel of just self-destruction. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of me sort of saying, I'm going to change my life, and I'm going to try to first and foremost, I had to put out the fire. I got connected very heavily to a 12-step program, and I started seeing a therapist, and I was able to stabilize my addiction. And then I went back to school, and going back to school gave me a container to kind of channel my energy into and to start helping other people. And that started giving my life the meaning that I never had as a shallow nightclub owner living in the most superficial of worlds. And then I began to realize on the societal level, we're an empty society. We're obsessed with materialism. Our values are upside down. And for a lot of people, addiction is about emptiness. It's about your life has no intrinsic meaning or purpose. So why not just self-medicate or escape. And so that was a lot of the insights that I had in my own addictive struggle. I knew that if I didn't create a life of meaning or purpose, I was going to implode. And that's been I celebrated 23 years of sobriety a few months ago.
Wow.
Of continuous sobriety. And it's been in that process of getting my life together that I've now been able to create programs, and I've been a university professor, and I've taught the treatment of addiction, and I've begun to understood the societal issue of there's something wrong with our society. And as part of that work, I started seeing that we were finding a new flavor of addiction to lose ourselves in. And a lot of that was now looking like digital escapism.
I'll tell you who the unsung heroes of COVID are. Of course, the frontline workers, but also those business owners who hung in there and continued to pay their employees. If you stayed open and paid your people, you could be eligible for up to $26,000 per employee at covidtaxrelief.org. $26,000 per employee. It's not a loan. These are government funds that you do not have to pay back. All types of businesses, including nonprofits and churches, can be eligible. But you need to apply now because Congress may pull these funds. covidtaxrelief.org has helped tens of thousands of businesses just like yours and has secured over $500 million. Unlike others, they charge nothing, zero upfront. They do all the work and share a percentage of the cash they get you. You did the tough thing for your employees during COVID. Now let covidtaxrelief.org help you get up to $26,000 per employee. Visit covidtaxrelief.org, covidtaxrelief.org. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.